welcome to Two Black Church Boys Church and Change. My name is Calvin Bell, and as always, I'm here with my co-host, William Lee. How you doing today, William?
I'm great. It's another great day to be alive. It's another great day to be here, and I am just elated and excited to be with you all tonight, and to have this conversation that we're going to have tonight. The genesis of this conversation actually comes from a talk that I've had with one of the panelists, or that Calvin and I had with one of the panelists back in May. And this is actually going to be a two-part conversation. And we entitled tonight's conversation, Blackness in the Diaspora, which really is a catch-all phrase for every Black person who was displaced from Africa throughout the world from the 1500s to now due to colonization, slavery, all types of atrocities that are the offspring of white supremacy. And so tonight's conversation really is a springboard discussion about what it means, our differences, our similarities as Black people who live in America, but who come from different places throughout the diaspora. So I want to introduce to you all tonight, the first person needs no introduction. That's our own sister, Serwaa Akoto, who is a prayer warrior, who is an awesome member of our church. Many of y'all know her from the prayer calls that she leads every Tuesday, but she's also a medical researcher at Cooper University Hospital. And also my good sis, one of my best and greatest friends on this side of glory, the one and only Esther Clovis, who is a licensed attorney who practices at a large law firm in New York. What I'm going to do is I'm going to allow them to talk a little bit about their backgrounds and their upbringings, and then we'll launch into a conversation about Blackness in the Diaspora. As always, we invite you to converse with us back and forth. We invite you to engage with us. I'll be checking periodically on Facebook for commentary. So this is no ways an interview. This is a free-flowing conversation. But we'll start with you, Serwaa. If you can just give us a little bit about your background and how you and your family came to the States, and then I'll ask Esther to do the same thing.
Okay. So my father came and then my mom came. And then when I was 6, they brought me here, and I've been here from the age of 6 till now. So I've been here for 20 years. And I've lived in Bronx, New York. Is a low income neighborhood. And I went to high school there, and in college, I went to Harlem. Well, I went to the university in Harlem, and I studied biology. And then that brought me here to Camden to continue my education. But our upbringing as a Ghanaian is very strict because our family, my parents like to maintain our culture and tradition, and they try to raise you in a way that you wouldn't blend in too much with other people's culture in this country. And anything that you do that does not align with it, they would speak against it, or they would try to find means so that you wouldn't find yourself in those environments. So with me, I often end up going to church, and most of the activities or parties that I go to is usually mainly Ghanaian. And yeah, so we are very strict and very focused on our tradition. And then also we also focus on our education, because when we come here to America, our main goal is to get a good education, get a good job, and then prosper yourself here. And also, if you have family back home, to take care of them. So we are very focused on just being disciplined, abiding by the laws and everything, so that we can make it here in this country. So yeah, that's really much my upbringing.
A little bit about your background, Esther?
Listening to Serwaa speak, I was like, she's just speaking to my whole life right now. So my name is Esther, as Will said. I grew up in East Orange, New Jersey, but my family is from Haiti, and my parents came here, when they immigrated to the US at the time, there was a dictatorship happening in Haiti under the Papa Dog, Baby Dog regime. So their coming here was a little bit traumatic in that sense. But I think that the immigrant mindset is very similar across all cultures, it seems like. But especially with Haitians, I think it was really similar for us. I mean, we always joke that my parents abided by the 3 L's, which is a Haitian joke that a lot of Haitian people say. It's l'école, lakay, l'église, which means school, home, church. And that was really where we were allowed to be. That was difficult because, you know, my parents were trying to raise us like we were in Haiti still, but we were in East Orange. And, you know, I was a child of this world. So I was like, you know, it was hard. I'm a very social person. So trying to keep me contained into this box that they wanted to protect us in was really difficult. And so even in college, when I was like, I'm going to study abroad and I'm going to go to Ghana, my parents were like, oh, you can't leave. That's not l'école. That's not school. I'm like, it is. It's just in another country. But I'm, you know, I have to spread my wings. But yeah, I think that there are some obvious differences in terms of how we were raised from our American counterparts, our African American counterparts, in terms of language and food and maybe a few traditions here and there. But I think there are also a lot of similarities. And I actually, part of it is cultural, you know, unique to the countries that we come from. But I also have found that it's just kind of tied to the immigrant experience. Like I was reading Warmth of Other Suns a few years ago, which is about the African American immigration experience from people going from the South to the North, and just reading people's stories about their hustle, their drive, their commitment to education, their commitment to success in the working world was really similar to what we do as immigrants from Haiti and from Ghana.
That's real. I think you are already alluded to, especially you, Esther, to what the first question was going to be about tonight was, but can you all speak to your experience growing up? I guess we'll start with you, Serwaa, again, because you grew up, you know, in New York. But can you all speak to your experience growing up around Black African Americans and what those interactions were like? And then I guess I'll speak to my experience growing up in a community, because the part of Camden that I grew up in was majority immigrant as well. So then I'll speak to my experiences.
Okay. So I will start first with like our mindset. So in the Ghanaian culture, we have this labeling that we give Black Americans, but we don't give it to any other groups in America, not even like the whites or Spanish. And they call it Akata, and that labeling does not simply mean that you are Black American, but it's like you are Black American that align with these stereotypes that doesn't fit our culture. So maybe drug dealing or violence, rude, all these things we consider Akata. So when they are raising us, like our parents, they put this in our mind, like do not go to school with them, talk to them, but do not become like them, associate with them, but please don't marry them. Is because they are Akata and will affect your upbringing and also what you plan to become in the future. So we have this mindset coming out of the house. So when I go to school and I see like my Black American friends arguing for the littlest thing, or I see the gang violence in my neighborhood and shooting, like I can't count how many times I've witnessed shooting in my neighborhood or in my school, all of that just confirms what my parents or my aunts have been saying about these particular group of people. And also when I watch BET, that was one of the channels that I watched the most growing up. And all that I see aligns with what I see in my neighborhood and then what I see my family saying about this particular group. So me growing up, even in New York, I still feel more comfortable just staying within my Ghanaian community, and everything that I do with my Ghanaian friends or group. But when I go to school, of course, I associate with everybody, including African American. Most of my friends were from the Caribbeans, and I think one of them were African American, but I interact with everybody, but I still have like they raise you with this mentality that's kind of hard to overlook. But it's not until I came to college that I met other people, other African Americans from who had like different life experiences and lived, I guess, in a more suburb neighborhood, and how the act was different from what I've been seeing on the TV or on BET, and what I see in my neighborhood or what my parents are telling me. And that began to like broaden my horizon, that of course it's not every African American that is like that. And because of that, I just began to, I guess, speak more to my parents that we have to really be careful of how we are using this labeling with this group. And I, for one, never use it because I already know it's offensive from the beginning. But most Ghanaians, I say, we are grown, we leave our house with this mentality. And then if the Black American does something that aligns with it, we are like, you see, my mom told me about this, or my parents told me about this. So yeah, that's my upbringing with, that's how I relate with this community growing up, yeah.
My experience was a little bit different. And I think that probably is because, I'm not sure why that is, but there was this idea with my parents, like, make sure, especially with my brother, because he was a boy, raising Black boys, especially in an urban area, can be very difficult, and just to keep them out of trouble. And so it was always this commitment to make sure he did not become a vagabond. And a vagabond is, I just found out like 10 years ago that it's an English word too, vagabond. Or I think I might have learned it from Disney. I was like, vagabond. But it's basically like a thug, right? Like you cannot be somebody who has dreads. That was a real thing for them. Somebody who had locks, somebody who had a man who had their ears pierced, somebody who had tattoos. Like that was completely against the grain from what my parents thought was acceptable. And they thought once you made that, it'd be like a slippery slope until you became a criminal who ended up in jail. And especially for my cousins who weren't, my male cousins who weren't born in this country, there was this, well, actually they told us this too. Y'all gonna laugh. So my parents are always like, if you get in trouble because, you know, we, as your parents weren't born in America, you're gonna get deported. Just don't think just because you were born here doesn't mean you're not gonna get deported. It wasn't until after I graduated law school, I was like, yeah, I think they could deport me. I'm still not gonna do anything to get me jailed, but like, I don't think they could deport me. But we were really scared that we had to walk in an extra straight line because of issues with immigration, right? Like, we were super scared that, you know, if we got into trouble, and that was just part of their scare tactics, but we did have cousins who did get into trouble and were deported. And so that looming threat was kind of over our heads as well. But in terms of who we could be friends with, my parents were kind of just like, as long as they're a good person and they're not a backup one. Like that's really it. And you know, we weren't allowed to date, but with my brother's friends, like, and people or male friends that we brought home, as long as, like, you know, they didn't have locks or anything like that, my parents wouldn't say anything. It would just be like, oh, okay, like whatever. And they knew that my sister and I were social, very, very social people. My brother had friends too, so more quiet, but like he had friends. And so they knew we had friends from all walks of life, and they were not judgmental about that. It was like, as long as their grades are good and you know, they're not getting into any trouble and it doesn't look like they're headed on this slippery slope towards becoming criminals or whatever it is. I think my parents have since then evolved, but at the time, I can even remember my brother coming home with his ears. He didn't even have them pierced. He just put like a magnetic earring on. And he and my cousin had a business selling them to other like children of immigrants too, who wanted their ears pierced so bad because it was the early 2000s. That was the thing to do. And like, there was a market for this, you know, they were making $5-10 a pop selling these magnetic earrings because everybody wanted to look that cool. But on the other hand, I do feel like there was tension, not necessarily like in my school, but I knew of tension between African Americans and the Haitians and the Jamaicans and the Africans. Like, it was always grouped into those subcategories of social groups. And, you know, especially when I was a really small kid, my cousins had just come from Haiti and they were at the public high school in East Orange. And it was like real turf war. I mean, people had what they called posses back then. And like the African Americans would fight with the Haitians. And I remember my cousin's neighbors like really cursed us out one day. They were like, go back to Africa. And we were like, yo, you're Black too. Like, African American comes from the term Africa, so like, you know, I think that was difficult, just feeling like we were otherized a little bit, just because, you know, my parents didn't necessarily speak English that well, or we eat a lot of rice.
That's interesting. We ate a lot of rice too. So
yeah, but you know, my mama's rice is different from your family.
It's different, but real quick, being from South Carolina and the heritage and the culture, we're a part of the Gullah culture. My family are descendants of Gullah culture, and they were slaves on rice farms, cotton too, but primarily rice farms. And so our culture, and I'm going to kind of segue into like responding to my own question, but our culture was like, in a lot of ways, similar to y'all. Like, we were people who migrated. You speak about One from Other Sons. I read that book when we were in law school. But we migrated from South Carolina, from the rice farms and the backwoods, to New Jersey in 1955. And my grandmother came up to New Jersey with an 8th grade education, started a restaurant in the late 50s, early 60s, became very industrious, very successful, opened up a bar, opened up a dry cleaners. And for us, when we were coming up, it was, don't disrespect our family name. Don't ruin our family name. Don't be like those other Black people who are ignorant, who are, you know, stereotypical. You talk about BET, Serwaa. It was like, don't be like the N-words that are on BET. Like, I remember my mom was like, there's a difference between an N-word and a Black person. Like, don't be an N-word, be a Black person. But the irony is, even growing up with that whole separation, there also was this idea that my folks had to work and I had to work with them to shed. And Esther, you were unconsciously a part of that shedding, and not even knowing it by building a relationship with my aunt. But I had to work with them to see other African immigrants, other Caribbean immigrants, differently than how they saw them. We've always felt like, I'm maybe in the Calvin, you can speak if you're younger than me, so maybe a little different for you, but I always grew up with this mentality that they think that they're smarter than me. They think that they're better than me. So because they think that they're better than me, I can't be friends with them. I have to seek out my fellow Black people and befriend them, because I grew up in a community of Puerto Ricans, Haitians, and Dominicans. And Esther, you can speak better than I can to the whole Haitian Dominican dynamic, but I grew up.
That's a whole other podcast.
Not on the podcast. All right, I got you. But we grew up with this whole idea, oh, they think that they're better than you, but really they're like, you know, they're hut people, or as Ma always said, oh, they eat with their hands. Like they're not civilized. They just all eat all their food with their hands. They don't know how to eat. And so part of my upbringing, and part of like intentionally interacting, and I think law school really did this for me in a way that like even college didn't, was by interacting with Black people from different parts of the diaspora, learning that although we have these differences, we're yet the same. And we're all cogs on this wheel, all impacted by white supremacy, all impacted by colonization, all impacted by slavery. But there are just these cultural dynamics that work to keep us, even as Black people, separate from each other.
Yeah, and I think that it's changing a little bit now in terms of what was generationally like that perspective of that divide. But I think right now, in the times that we're living in, I think people are now trying to come together and find ways to really see each other on more of a human level in terms of like we're the same skin color and not where we came from. And the schools, at least I've gone to three distinct different schools in terms of size. And for me personally, I've seen that just being Black in itself, we've always come together. In terms of that, I've been able to see that in certain clubs and certain spaces. The Black affinity group, for example, that we have at our school. There were students from everywhere, different locations, and just me hearing the stories, the backgrounds of students who came from these different areas just to describe their experiences. Distinctly, we just unite on the same level that we know that we're a marginalized group in itself. So we just come together around that experience, that being marginalized in this country where we're not even a part of the makeup, or not seen as a part of the makeup of what this country deems successful, deems right, deems a part of like who made this community, who made this world, who made this country. I think that's why we unite more so. In college, I expect to see that there are different clubs, not only for African Americans or Black Americans or Black people, but also for those a part of the Caribbean areas and those a part of African countries and different things like that. Because I know that there's also a sense of affinity within those groups as well. But at times, I think that there needs to be a space where we like come together, uniting around that experience. Because yes, we came from different areas. However, we have a very similar experience at the same time, which I think leads to the next question about how can we all come together just to be universal within the Black diaspora itself, not dividing each other based on where we come from, but more so just knowing that we're Black, and that is a way in which we can unite ourselves. What are ways that we can do that?
And before we answer that, because I want to kind of speak to something that Calvin spoke to, and I want to kind of start with Esther because one of the things that brought me and Esther together was being at Penn Law and being literally 2 of 18 Black people. And the uniqueness about Penn is that they claim that this was not an algorithm. They claim this was just completely random. But in our first year law class, there were 3 classes. There are 18 Black people, and they divided us 6 Black people in each section. And not only that, but 3 Black men, 3 Black women, 3 Black men, 3 Black women, 3 Black men, 3 Black women. And that was supposedly random, completely random.
They thought they were slick. Really? I could count on me.
Like places we didn't know that it was, But I guess I want to start with Esther because I know one of the things that brought us together was the uniqueness and the daily microaggressions of racism that we experienced in that space. And I'll testify to this behind her back. So, if it wasn't for Esther and for other people, particularly my Black classmates in that space, I would not have finished it. So in answering that question, Esther, can you also speak to, I guess, those experiences?
Yeah, and Penn had its microaggressions and macro alike, as we both know. Great experience altogether, but anyways, I digress. So I think that I don't want to say there's a danger in it, but I don't like this idea of necessarily saying we are all one, because in doing that, you kind of erase what makes us unique. And if you know me, the first day you met me, you probably knew I was Haitian. I'm sure I said it. And yeah. I don't know anyone who knows me that doesn't know that, because I'm super proud of it. And if I could have a tattoo of the flag on my face, I would, but that would make me a vagabond. So I'm just kidding. But at the same time, I think that it's really important that we do understand that there is a lot of commonality among us as Pan-African people, right? Like, so I feel like one of the most interesting things somebody told me when I was like 14 is like, when the cops go to shoot you, they don't ask what kind of N-word you are. They just see the color Black and they pull their trigger, right? That's it. They don't care if you're from Zimbabwe or if you're from Newark, you're Black. And I think that when it comes to, the first question that we were talking about with respect to our experiences with our parents and how we were brought up, I think that one of the things that made my parents not feel like you can't speak to African American people or whatever, or you can't associate with them, is because they had a very unique perspective. Because maybe about like 10 years into them being here, Amadou Diallo, who's a Haitian man, was brutalized by the NYPD. And I mean, when I say brutalized, I mean, he was beaten. You guys know the story. He was beaten, sodomized. It was, he lived to tell the story, but he was severely beaten. And obviously this is coming like, a couple years after Rodney King. So they're seeing this happen over and over and over again to Black people. They also had a really thorough understanding of the fact that African American people are the descendants of chattel slavery. Haitian people are the descendants of slavery, right? Like that is part of our lineage as well. And so we always would say, we just, and on top of that, even if you listen to some Haitian music, there's like songs about Africa, like they're really old songs. They're kind of like hymnals. I don't even want to call them hymnals. I swear they play it on the Haitian radio every day. My parents are probably listening. If you walk into our kitchen, you could probably hear the song, but it's talking about Guinea and like all these countries and trying to be reminiscent of their roots. So there's just so much commonality. And I think being right in the middle as a Caribbean person, having a lot of African retentions in our culture, coming from like a majority Black country, understanding our connection to Africa, but also understanding our connection to the Americas due to the geographic aspect of it, really helped my parents understand that we are more alike than we would like to claim, right? Than some people would like to claim. Than the guy who told us to go back to Africa would like to claim, and then the gangs, who were separating by what country they were from would like to claim. So I think that's really important. Second thing is Penn was not my first rodeo of being at a predominantly white institution. My high school had 6 Black people in it. My college was predominantly white. Penn, very white, very, very white. And so for the first time when I was in high school, going to high school that was predominantly white, it was like, yo, where the other Black people at? We had 6 in our class, and we were all, African Americans, Caribbean, African, we were all from different places. One person was like half Puerto Rican, but we all were like, yep, you know what? When the rest of the school looks at us, we know what they see. They don't see the differences in us. And what we have in common here is we all know how hard we had to work to be here. So we're going to also have to work hard to get each other through this experience. And so that's always been the same experience I've had in college. It was the same experience I had in law school, I think especially in law school, because that's like a professional school where it comes with its unique set of challenges, especially, Will tell you, we had people who just wouldn't even acknowledge our presence walking down the hallway. We had professors say that Black students didn't really belong in institutions like Penn. There were lots of crazy, crazy things that happened, lots of great people there as well, and I can't emphasize that enough, but we needed each other. And I don't think any of us would have had as great of an experience we had without each other. And so I think that it's so important to not shy away from the fact that you're Black when you go into a space where not everybody looks like you. It's so important to be able to say, okay, I see what time it is. I see this, and I see you too. And I also thought what was interesting about Penn was that like there were people from Penn who had gone to the same college I had gone to, and they were really active in the Black community at Penn, but they hadn't been active in the Black community at Princeton at all. And so it was just really interesting that, and I saw this with a lot of my friends from college who were Black but didn't necessarily associate with Black people like that. And the older you get, even if you try to deny it, the older you get, there's going to come this understanding at some point where it's like, I actually do need the other Black people in the space that I'm in. You can't deny that. It's going to hit you in the face. I'm talking about the people who really were like, I have 0 Black friends on campus, even though I'm Black. By the time they got to Penn, they were like, Balsa, on the forever.
Yes, that's real. And let me reframe the question before we get to you, Serwaa, because it's something that Esther said that I didn't even pick up on when we framed the question initially. What I mean is that we're not the same, and I never want to downplay anyone else's culture. Like, you know, as a Black person in America, I'm proud to be a Black person in America. The same way Esther was rah Haitian, I'm rah. My family's from South Carolina. My family is, I used to call us American Negro. Like that. That's how I used to refer to it. That maybe that's not the best terminology, but when and reframing this question to you, Serwaa, but we all have our own roles to play being Black in America, even within our differences. So I guess my question to you is, how do we work together? How do we celebrate our diversity as a Black people from various parts of the diaspora? And how do we then work together to recognize that, as Esther said, you know, the average Caucasian person isn't going to ask you if you're Ghanaian or if you're Haitian or if you're Black when they see you. They just want to all lump you in together.
Honestly, like that's one thing that I said to myself after George Floyd's death, because I never really considered the fact that though I'm Ghanaian, here a white person would see me as just Black, end of story. And after that incident, there was a youth member that did a webinar on Zoom, and she had invited all the Ghanaians that she knew, plus all the African American, Black Americans that she knew. And then we came together to discuss, okay, like, this is what is going on in America. And as the Ghanaians, this is our mentality. In fact, we weren't really aware of what is going on until this year with all the news media of all the different deaths that has happened and the police brutality. Honestly, me personally, this year is when I began to hear about systemic racism. I heard about racism, but systemic racism is completely new to me. And so we got together on this Zoom app and we were all discussing, you know, our viewpoints about the whole issue of racism in America and oppression. And the Black Americans told us about their experience and what they have been going through. And we were completely unaware of that. So now we were working towards a plan of how we can, you know, join you, maybe how we could vote to help us as Blacks in this country, instead of us just being so focused on, I just want to finish school, take care of my family and call it a day. Whatever happened to you just happens to you, because it will happen to me as well. So I think having these intentional conversations will help us come together. And also, like in our college campuses and our church groups, I know that in my church group in New York, everything that the youth does, they invite other Ghanaian people in within the neighborhood. Even though we have Black American churches and Black American youth, we don't usually invite them. But now I guess since we are seeing what is going on, we are more intentional about it. And with our recent revivals and planning, we are trying to reach out to Black Americans as well, so that we could join that bridge. Yeah, so the more we become aware, the more we are inclined to come together and help with this fight.
Yeah, so I guess to segue, as we talk about things that kind of bring us together in ways that we can find something that brings us together, what do you think is preventing us from getting to that place? Because I think that although at times it might happen or it might occur, there's still something that is preventing us from getting to that space to really discuss and talk about the issues, even if we try to cover it up with dirt or something like that, when we know that there are like wounds under there.
For me, I believe is, again, our mentality and how we have been raised and our culture and how we want to be rooted in our culture, no matter, like, we do want to help with the fight, we do want to address racial issues, but our culture tells us if we work hard at it, you will make it, right? And what I'm learning recently with the idea of systemic racism is just that, like, the system is built against you as a Black person. But in my culture, if you were to tell a Ghanaian that, they would even label you as a witch, like you are trying to curse my future. So that in itself makes it hard for us to, though we want to help, we like, our culture makes it hard for us to help, and the way our mind is wired, it makes it hard for us to help because we don't feel like we would be oppressed or we would fail in this country if we just work at it. And we have seen our parents do it and have done well, and other people around us that are Ghanaian. So it's hard for you to convince me or another Ghanaian that you cannot make it. So it's because of these type of, I guess the mentality is the issue with us coming together. Yeah.
I want to ask a follow up because something that you said kind of it has my head spinning a little bit. When you describe it as help, it seems to me that I think maybe one of the first things that we have to do is we have to kind of shift the language, right? So it's not so much help, but it's more so understanding that we all share a similar burden under white supremacy, under colonization, under white privilege, right? So it's not so much that we're helping each other, but maybe it's more so the fact that we all are similarly burdened. That we may have our different cultures and our different perspectives and our different lenses as different Black people, but we're all similarly burdened by systemic racism. So I don't know if maybe how do we work on shifting the mindset of people from we're helping Black people to we're similarly situated in the struggle with Black people. I'm not saying that to be disparaging or attacking, but it's just something that kind of triggered my thought pattern.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to say, is that we don't see ourselves as, like, the burden that you're talking about. We don't feel like we experience it personally in our community. That's why I'm saying that when we have that conversation of coming together, in our minds is us trying to find ways that maybe could help the community. That's why I was using help, because we don't feel like we are experiencing it.
This is something that I've actually thought about quite a bit because, I can't say quite a bit, but a little bit, because I think my parents for a while were thinking, there are Black people who have been in this country for decades, and this is the land of promise and the land of hope and the land of opportunity. And they don't own anything. And my parents, own a house, even though my dad's a taxi driver. Sorry for the noise. My dad's a taxi driver. My mom works in a factory. My parents are really blue collar workers, have worked really hard, saved all their pennies, sent their kids to school, bought a house. They're like, how is it that we were able to do more in being here in less than one generation than people were able to do being here for multiple generations? And I think that that's what Serwaa is getting at, right? And I told my parents, this is maybe 15 years ago, and they've evolved a lot since then, but I told them, you felt trapped by the system that you were in Haiti, and you felt like you could not rise economically. There was no mobility for you. So what did you do? You escaped, you left, you went to America. There are people who have that same exact feeling. There's a whole group of people who have that same exact system of oppression, not same exact, but there's that feeling of being oppressed and being stuck in this country. But where are they supposed to go? And you think that you're successful because, for whatever reason, really, the sociological data says that the reason you've been successful is probably because you're an immigrant. No other real reason. Not no other real reason, but that immigrants, like we were talking about before with Warmth of Other Suns, that was one of the trends that you saw over and over again with African American immigrants who came to the United States. I'm sorry, who came who migrated to the north of the United States, to Chicago, to New York, wherever, you saw that they were gaining more educational success, they were gaining more economic success, their home ownership was at much higher rates. And that was in comparison to even, some of the white people who had been there for generations. It's really just a symptom of being an immigrant that success is attributed to. But that doesn't erase the problems of systemic racism. Even in Ghana, having studied abroad there, like that was one thing that they talked about over and over and over again was colonization, right? That was what systemic racism looked like in Ghana. In Haiti, it was slavery. In the United States, it's slavery. But also being the minority population to this day, right? So it looks a little bit different in every country, but this idea that systemic racism is inescapable is something that follows us no matter where we go. And so I think that is one thing, like understanding why you are quote unquote successful as immigrants, where that mentality comes from is one thing. But the other thing I think is it's like also two-part, right? It's easy to separate yourself coming from an immigrant family or being an immigrant yourself because you don't see people who share your culture on television, right? You don't see, like when you turn on the radio, when you turn on the TV, when you look in the newspaper, it's like all people who are African American, right? It seems like it's their country, right? Not their country, obviously not, but you know what I'm saying? Like when Black people are being represented, it's usually specific to African American people, and people are always conflating African American with Black. Like I always, if I'm not African American, I'm Black American, because I think African American it refers to a very specific group of people who come from chattel slavery in the United States. That's not me, and I think there's a difference in our culture, even though there are similarities. And I don't know. I think if there was a way we could like integrate more cultures into representing Black people in the mainstream media, I think that would be helpful for African American people as well to know that, hey, they're just like us. And when we see you guys, oh, they're just like us too, I think that those are two things, mentality, shifting perspectives that could be really helpful.
Yeah, and I think that's interesting that you brought that up, like mainstream media. I know like Family Feud, for example, just went over to Africa, and Steve Harvey is the host over there. And I don't know if that is, I don't know. I think that, yes, I know.
Wait.
I know it's probably a scheme, blah, 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 but I just find it interesting. But also in the same essence that like people who immigrate to America, learning about the history of like African Americans, but the same thing with African Americans going over to Africa and being tourists and how they take advantage of that experience. Do we learn about the history of Africa itself? That is, I think that more so we should be learning about that, because there are issues going on that we kind of bring up ourselves. When I hate the stereotype when people are like, oh, there are children in Africa that don't have food and different things like that. I think that's something that
children in North that don't got food.
Exactly.
Children in Canada.
Exactly. And I always heard that around other Black African Americans, Black Americans who would say things like that. And I'm like, that is just pushing those stereotypes that we're dealing with in our own community. And so saying that makes it worse, and that already puts a divide between us and doesn't help us mend those wounds that we have between our communities, because overall we are Black Americans.
Right. And I think if we focus more on educating, my history teacher in high school always used to say, history is written by the victors, right? And in America, Black people are not seen as the victors. But if we were the ones writing the history books, we would know more about how Ghanaian history is American history and how Haitian history is American history, right? Like Kwame Nkrumah coming over here, he was the first president of Ghana. I mean, this man was a Sigma. He was blacky black. This dude was like goes over to Ghana and he's like, I want all my African American brothers and sisters to come over here. And you had like this Black intellectual population from the United States going from the US to Germany to France to Ghana, and living in all of these different places. Like people like Du Bois went and died in Ghana, right? Like there's so much connection. With Haiti, you had, after Haiti won their independence, first Black country to win their independence and become a free nation on the Western Hemisphere, they came over to the United States and they helped fight in slave rebellions, right? The Louisiana Purchase was bought in part with Haitian money that was stolen from the country. You go to Louisiana, it's that Creole culture, that's Haiti, that's Haitian culture, like beignets, that's Haitian, right? Like so much of our culture is intertwined. Chicago, founded by Point du Sable, who was a Haitian man. Nobody knows. And then 1700s, like, or 17 or 1800s, nobody knows that because we're not educated by that, because we're not the ones writing the history books. But I promise you, if we did more of a concerted effort to educate each other about how American history has affected us, vice versa, I think that it would be a lot easier to establish common grounds amongst different cultures.
Yeah, I agree, for sure. Something that you said, Esther, that was really powerful was about the idea that we're all oppressed. And the difference between perhaps your experience and my experience is that you all escaped your oppression and are living, in the aftermath of escaping, although we're still that's why I did air quotes.
Yeah.
But for us, we're still yoked under the burden of our oppression. We haven't even escaped our oppressors yet to experience the aftermath of our quote unquote oppression. Although in my personal opinion, as long as the world operates under the gaze of white supremacy, we're never really free. But we still are, and we're still trying to get to the aftermath of being an oppressed people. And the time that we have left, I'll start with Serwaa and Esther. Can you just share your heart about if you could sit across the table from a person who may be ignorant to your culture, ignorant to how we're connected, what would you want them to know?
And if you could add in just your experience too with being in the Black church and how that has also maybe shaped your own experience and what you're doing now too. That would be great, especially since we're on the church's platform.
Oh yeah, I was good, yeah.
Church, yes.
First, I would say, I feel starting from Parkside, since I've been here, most of the members have just been really welcoming to me. And that is, at first I was just pretty nervous as to how to relate with, African Americans, because again, growing up, it was completely different. But you guys are just so welcoming and have treated me so well, that just like one of your own. So because of that, at times, again, I will always tell my parents or like other friends that I know that they are not what we paint them to be. And there's always a part of me that always wants to apologize at times when I speak to Black Americans, especially after being in this church and also interacting with other African Americans here in Camden. And also there's a part of me that also wants to be involved in the youth or the young adults, Black young adults here in this city and also in other Black populated areas in America, to just try to, I guess, uplift them in Christ and also like help them to find their purpose, walk in that. And I feel like once we have an idea of our purpose and we help them with any financial needs, education, wherever it may be, that in itself will give them the foundation that they need to rise above the difficulties that they are facing here in this country. So yeah, I'm just very moved by what I've seen, and it's definitely nothing that I've been told growing up. Yeah, so every day I'm trying to work at it. Yeah.
Yeah, for me, what I would say is on my heart is like, thank you. And because, well, thank you both for putting this together, but also, Black people generally, no matter where they're from, thank you for existing and thank you for being there. And everywhere I've gone, I've always felt like my eyes directly shift towards the first Black person in the room that I see, if there is one, right? And I always feel like, okay, there's someone else there. And just, I don't care where you're from. It's just like, whoo, you could be from the mountains of Caucasia, but if you got a little melanin, I see you. I see you and I'm rooting for you. And for those that are rooting for us, I'm always thankful. And, not all kinfolk are kinfolk, but for the kinfolk, I'm always like, thank you. And especially to like African American people, being in this country as the child of immigrants is hard because you're not really sure what your culture is, because you're being told by your parents that you're supposed to speak this way and act this way and eat this way, and the world is just so much richer than that. And I feel like in this country, any culture that exists is because of Black people, and all of the opportunities that you and I have had is because of Black people, the ancestors in this country. Like, we wouldn't even be able to be immigrants here who could go become medical researchers or go off to certain colleges or become lawyers if it wasn't for the people in the African American lineage that have fought for the rights that we have now. So, it doesn't even make sense to me when people try to separate themselves from African American people, because it's like, no. They did that, okay? They've done so much and they continue to do so much despite all of the difficulties. And with respect to church, I grew up going to a Haitian church, a Haitian Catholic church, but I have been to your church, Will, and you're right. I felt it. I felt the love, so welcoming, and so thank you guys for that as well.
Oh, cool. And the time that remains, I just want to, on my end, thank both of you. Thank you, Serwaa. We had a little bit of an intense fellowship in May, but thank you for, expressing your opinion. I know sometimes I can be a little bullheaded, but thank you for being patient with me. Thank you for expressing yourself. Thank you for being open to having this conversation. And then thank you also for being vulnerable and for talking about learning about systemic racism, for taking those conversations back to your community, back to your friends and family. I think that ultimately, in order for us to get ahead, we have to have those conversations. And I think that in my mind, I've reached a space that I'm not as willing anymore to do that work. And so I'm always greatly appreciative for people who do that work. And then Esther, my sister, what can I say about you? Just thank you so much for being you. Thank you for being the bold, Black, powerful woman that you are. Thank you for being the light at Penn that you were. Because I say this all the time behind your back, so I'll say it to your face. If it were not for you, I probably would not have finished that experience. If it were not for you being the light that you were on that campus and loving the way that you loved and fighting the way that you fought, for spaces to be better there, I wouldn't have finished. And thank you for, talking to my aunts and being a part of shifting their mindset and bringing your mom around and all of that and building relationships with them as well.
Well, I'm going to interrupt you because I feel like, not to make this love fest, but the love is very mutual. I've said this behind your back, so I'll say it to your face. You are one of the most brilliant people I've ever met in my life. And I don't say that lightly. I really, really mean that. Like, the way your mind works is absolutely beautiful. And so thank you for sharing it with your church community, the world today, and for inviting us to participate with you. But also, like, what you say I've done for your family, you've absolutely done it for mine. Like, I told my mom I was doing this with you. My mom never like, oh, William, oh, we're praying for William all the time. Oh my goodness. William. Oh, my mom's like, I'm looking for him. My God. Oh, I love William. And always felt like, oh, she's good in Philly because, you know, she has her friends like Will, and you're like always one of their favorite people. So thank you. And I Calvin, you have a great mentor, friend, so you're in good hands, and I can tell you're going to go places as well.
It's just from the Love Fest. Thank you, Calvin, for being an awesome young man of God, and for us doing this together. We're running low on time. So, Calvin, do you have any closing words?
I just want to thank you both for being on here, and we hope to have a part 2 to this conversation. Welcome in some other people as well, just to really find a way to unite us as Black people within this country, but also to unite us as Black people within this world, because I think that's really where our conversation, this podcast, really stems from. It's to find ways to not only talk about the issues that we go through, the problems that we go through, but also ways to find uniting us, but also find love. That's good.
That's great. So all hearts and minds are being clear. And so next week we're 2 Black church boys, and